please feel free to fire the hand up and ask questions as we go. So those of you who don't use Microsoft Teams before, this is the platform that we use as a staff team with all the student clubs. So it's great to introduce this to you if you don't know what it is, because I think it might be a platform that will benefit coaches moving forward. So there are a few functions. So there's a raise your hand function. Unfortunately, I don't know if it works on an iPad, but it certainly doesn't work on an iPhone. The raise your hand function might only work on a laptop, but that's there if you need it. There's also the chat function. So if you want to ask a question, then just say your name in that space and then we'll come to you. But as I say, there is an opportunity to ask questions at the end as well. I'm just going to, I think we just get started. There's a good number of people in the call, and those that haven't managed to make it, we can give them the recording of this. So to help with that, can I just ask everyone just to switch off their video and then to switch off to make sure that they're on mute. And then we'll get started. All right, guys, so thanks very much for joining us this evening. Emma, do you guys want to put yourself on your video off? Great. Thanks for joining us. We hope that this will be some good information for you. I probably apologise in advance for the fact that there is probably a lot of information, but that's purposeful to make sure that you guys are informed. We have had a number of calls with the student club committees up to this date to get their thoughts and their feedback and present our way of working moving forward. So this is a suite of different communication tools that we're implementing the next wee while. So really welcome this. As I alluded to in my email previously, I think you guys do a fantastic job for us, but we don't really engage you guys on a one-to-one basis or even on a group basis, and it's something I want to change over time, and I think we've got now the staff capacity in the future to help us with that. So that's certainly an intention. So as always with times of crisis, some good can come from it. So hopefully this helps us moving forward. So I'll pass by the two photos of Graham and Paige, and move on to who you'll know from our rowing and our football clubs, and just run you through the agenda. So I'm going to chat to you about the key principles that we've applied as part of our planning around restarting up activity. Some key updates that are useful for you. I'm not going to go into the detail of all of them. I'll skim over them and we'll send you the slides afterwards. And then go through some specifics around sport planning, so facilities, occupancy, adapted approach to training, and then starting to really getting you to think around coaching delivery. And I've looked up some tips. I'm sure you guys have got your own. So it's getting that conversation started with you. And then looking at risk bridge for the next step. So that's the agenda. We're on for an hour and a half. We definitely won't go over that. And as I say, please do, there is an opportunity to ask questions at the end, but I like the flow with if there is questions that come in on a specific topic that's pertinent, then please do just raise your hand or comment in the chat. And if it gets out of hand, I might just reel it in a wee bit. So, give the key principles. This is something we presented to the team, or there's something that the staff created and presented to the club committees. First and foremost, safety is absolute paramount importance, and that comes through in a lot of our planning and a lot of the work that we're trying to put in place. So that will always be a guiding principle in this sort of current environment. In terms of other principles, communication. So as part of this, as I've alluded to before, we're trying to provide as much communication as possible to people to make sure that they're informed and allow them to ask questions of us. Because it is overwhelming, the amount of information that is out there. So we're all in it together to try and make the best of that information and make sure we communicate that in a meaningful way. One thing that we've had right throughout our planning process is that we see such a critical importance to sport physical and mental well-being and what we offer to the university and to the students. And we've been pushing that and flying that flag across a lot of university, and to a certain extent, we're preaching to the converted at Heriot-Watt because they're very bought into student sport. But what we're wanting to try and do is provide as close to as normal as possible. And that was what we set out right at the beginning, was that was our ambition to get to that point. And clearly there's going to be some challenges within that, but that was our guiding first principle, because we know the importance of sport to the students. One other thing that was critical was the sustainability. Clearly you guys will all be aware of financial challenges across the world, and sport is no different to that. University is in financial difficulty, so is Oriam, and Triple S and Bucks have their own challenges as well in terms of meeting bottom lines and making sure there's a sustainability element. So we've all got to play our part in making sure all these organisations still exist for the benefit of our members. So there is that's definitely part of our thinking. And clearly we need to be innovative. We couldn't just do exactly what we've done before and roll out again. We need to be innovative and agile with our approach. So hopefully you can associate strongly with those, but those are some of the guiding principles that have helped us with forming our plan. So hopefully you are in agreement with those. I'm just going to run through some updates, and I say I'm not going to go through each bullet point, but they're there on the screen if you want. But I'll just pull out a couple of points, and we can send you the slides afterwards. So I'm going to highlight the bold points on these slides. That in terms of university updates, classes are now beginning to encroach on a Wednesday afternoon. It's something that we were looking to try and protect. But that is being a real challenge with the occupancy that I've alluded to in this slide. So there is a need for classes to go into Wednesday afternoons. We don't know the exact detail of the impact of that. It's something that we are staying agile to. But just a reference point around that some classes or some sport might be disrupted because of that. Clearly we've got to try and mitigate that. One mitigation is actually making sure that that doesn't turn into a long-term arrangement, and we've had assurances from the university that is not the case, and they value student sport and they value the Wednesday afternoon, so it's very much a short-term approach to be able to get the university up and running and through this early period. But clearly we've got to look at how we operate on a Wednesday afternoon if there is activity on a Wednesday afternoon. In terms of Oriam updates, we have been remobilising to get to a point where we're opening on the 1st of August. We had hoped that would be a more meaningful way. The last announcement from Nicola Sturgeon obviously didn't release a start date for gyms. We're hopeful tomorrow we will get at least a date coming forward. But essentially, because of the performance activity that we've had in place, so we had Glasgow Warriors come in last week. We've got Hearts coming in to start their pre-season next week, and then we've got a few other groups like Scottish Squash and Scottish Judo, or Judo Scotland, that have come in and used the facility. So because of that, we're in a bit of a limbo situation where we're trying to get as much activity and be open for people, as much activity within guidelines as possible, but still trying to maximise furlough as much as we possibly can. So we are trying to get business in currently, but if it gets to a period where that is challenging out with performance sport, then we just need to strip down our expectation and our staffing and our opening hours. So that's a bit of a fluid situation right now. Our intention is to be back to full operating hours in September, and that will be at the mercy of how much activity is able to take place. If there is a lot of activity that's able to take place, then that's a no-brainer. We'll be able to do that. We might just on nights where there might be activity that we definitely won't take place, like a Friday evening, for example. There's a massive booking that we've got in terms of Friday night lights in the indoor sports hall. We need to financially work out, is it viable if activity such as that doesn't take place? Is it viable to keep the building open 100% for some of that evening? But as I say, we've not put any intention to do that as of yet. It's a fluid situation, and we're monitoring it, and we'll get information to you as soon as we have it. But we are looking to get full operating hours, and that is our intention to do so. A couple of other points. We had early discussion about whether Hall 1 was going to be used for gym equipment use, and that is happening in some facilities in other universities in the country. We've managed to avoid that while still maintaining all the gym access all the gym equipment access for the members, which is great. So we're just spreading that around the facility a bit more than normal. And important for some of this for some of the synthetic-based sports, the indoor synthetic has been classed as an outdoor space because of the natural ventilation that has within that, which might help us use it earlier, and the restrictions might be easier when that space is available in comparison to indoor spaces. So a few updates from Oriam. In terms of the sort of SSS or BUCS governing body updates, there's a number of different bits of information on BUCS website. There's a couple of links on here for that. Essentially, the BUCS league's obviously finished. They are not going to start until January 2020. So no BUCS league activity is going to start until then. There is going to be no promotion or relegation as a result of that, because it's going to be a condensed period of in semester 2, and also they won't have a full cohort of teams that they normally would. So there's no promotion or relegation within that season, and in the season after 2021 to 2022 will be based on the end of this season, and in terms of when the season was ended. So we've let our clubs know all of that information, and there is more information on the BUCS website should you want to delve deeper into that. The other thing to reference, which you might be aware of through your dealings with any sort of governing body communication, is the return to play guidelines that all the different sports are creating. And clearly for a sports union, having 31 sports is a challenge to be able to keep up to date with those. So we're doing our best to have sight of those, condensed down. Graham's laughing because he had the chore of looking through all of them. We're trying to condense that down, and so we've got a basic understanding across the sports union of what's happening within the individual sports. But there's so much information there that we're relying on the club committees and yourselves to make sure that you're abreast with the correct information around the return to play guidelines. Currently, we're in phase 3 in Scotland, so phase 3 guidelines have come out for the majority of governing body sports, and it'll be yet to be seen whether actually Nicola's announcement tomorrow will lead to a greater easing, which means that there's a 3.1 worth of guidelines which are produced in the next week or so, which allows us to be even more informed on what the programme will look like. But we need to wait and see after tomorrow, but we're certainly keeping our eye on that, and would encourage you guys to do the same. So those are just some quick fire updates for you, and then I'm just going to go into how we are planning to deliver sport in this term. And I'll probably caveat this very early on to say that there's still so many variables there that that things may change. But what we're trying to do is trying to provide a very strong, educated guess as to how we think sport is going to be come the start of term, with contingencies in place should things not materialise in that way. But our key principles has led us to develop this sort of programme of activity. One thing that we did quite early on was just an understanding of how our sports sat within certain headings, and that's informed our discussions with them on individual focus groups, as well as understanding where there might be higher risk sports and lower risk sports. So you can see that phase 4, they're indoor contact sports, they're obviously higher risk sports. That doesn't mean to say that we're not going to do anything with those sports. Absolutely not. We will look to work with those clubs to work within the restrictions, and we'll have facilities available for these sports to be able to take place. It's just it might be a different version of what it was previously, and that's for all of us to work out. Clearly, sports further down the line, in the phase 1, sports that came in phase 1 and 2, cycling, golf, mountaineering, tennis, athletics, there's more ability to do stuff within that space, so to almost a normal way of working. So that helped us with our planning and getting us thinking. In terms of facilities, just going to Beijing. Hi, Beige. Good to have you on. So we're on to Beige. If you just want to put your camera and your off and you're on mute, that'll help us. We've already seen your ugly mug at the beginning of the beginning of the slideshow anyway, which you'll see at the end. But anyway, we're on facilities. What there's going to be in Oriam is obviously there's a heightened hygiene safety measures in place. Specifically, there's going to be signage across the building which will recognise. There's not going to be a one-way system within Oriam other than the gym, and there will be a limited capacity in terms of what you're able to book on in the gym, and that's just the reality of life. Everything that will happen within Oriam will need to be limited to some extent in terms of numbers. And it's up for us to sort of work that out based on the guidelines that are then created. So that will take place within Oriam. There will be a walkthrough video that the team are working on just now, which we'll send out to you guys as well as all the clubs and all the returning members to make sure that the expectations around what they're coming back to is there, which will help a lot. The other things to reference in terms of an Oriam perspective is changing rooms are currently out of action, and that's something that we will review as time goes on. But that's currently the way, and toilets are only open for certain people, for certain groups at times, so it is restricted in a way. Now clearly we're going to have an ability to have toilets open for public in the future. But I suppose the changing room element might mean that students need to come sort of pre-changed to activity, and changing rooms is a harder one for us to manage than toilets is, for an example. So there might be some challenges in there for us to have to work through with individual members. There will be entry and exit points from facilities. So in Hall 1, for example, you might go in the main doors in Hall 1 and then exit out the fire exit doors. That will help with the flow of people, because clearly you know what it's like in Oriam at 5:30. There's lots of people in the building flowing through and flowing back and forward between each other. We just need to minimise that as much as possible. So there'll be specific movement of people in specific facilities. In terms of external facility access, we are monitoring that. Clearly that is out with our control. So all we can do is react to that. We're working with clubs that can't access any external facilities on any contingencies. Sports like swimming, for example, are at high risk of not being able to get any external facility access, and we need to work that through with them. From an Oriam perspective, we are, if we backfill that with any sort of access within Oriam, we will absolutely work towards that. But Oriam is open for all the clubs to have some sort of access within the space, and that's what we're working towards. Okay, so that's the facility. Onto the programming of that space. We are basing our program on last year's program. Now there was a few changes just through requests that have come in from clubs at the end of last year that we have looked to accommodate. So which you may or may not be aware of, but we're looking to still make those changes. But basically the changes are minuscule. The program is going to be exactly what it was before. Now, the extent, or that's our ambition, sorry, the extent of us being able to realise that it will be dependent on the occupancy and capacity of the different spaces and the different sports, which I'll go on and chat about. But essentially, if you are thinking about returning to sport at Heriot-Watt with your club, whatever activity, whatever sessions you had last year, you should have then again this year. That should give some clarity at least to yourselves on that. In terms of the occupancy and capacity, it's a real headache, if I'm being honest, and something that someone like me who likes to be organised feel completely out of our control with it. But that's the reality of the situation. Current restrictions are 15 people from 5 households outdoor for informal sport. And for indoor, there's non-sport, but 8 people from 2 households, just off the government guidelines. Now, obviously, if that was to be the restrictions come September, we've got a big challenge on our hands, because really, in terms of outdoor space, we can only get a maximum of 5 people, albeit there might be some students that live in the same household, who are in the same club. 5 households max generally into one space, which would be a nightmare. So current restrictions are obviously not feasible for sport taking place, but hopefully that will ease within time. But that just gives you an idea of the restrictions that are in place if you weren't aware of that already. One thing that we're going to do as part of our sort of principle-led approach is try and get the facility access for fair across the board. So if say you had 100 students in your membership last year, we want to try and get at least one session per week for every single one of those members, and it will be obviously up to us all to try and attract as many people in as possible. But if we're going off last year's membership, then we'll try and get one session per week for that individual. So that is a minimum threshold, and some clubs might manage more than that. Some others might actually really struggle to make that, and we're going to have to support them with additional facility space to allow that to happen. On that very point, if there is a need to provide additional facility space to try and get up to that threshold, it might mean that we need to have at weekend or morning access for students to be able to take part in that specific club. Now, clearly, from a coach's perspective, that's we're not asking you guys to therefore commit your time to coach with those additional sessions. It should just be based on the sessions that you are expecting to deliver on based on last year's programme. So that, and I suppose which underpins that is the fact that we don't have any other additional budget to say, right, there's an additional morning session for archery. Bill, can you come in and we'll pay you for providing that service? We just don't have the budget to be able to accommodate that, because we're just going with what status quo is from last year. So that might mean that we need to lean on some students to be able to facilitate that. That might not be possible in some sports. It might be possible in others, which might mean that we need to have these same conversations with other people that are allocated in the club, or the club committee just need to have that elevated role in terms of the responsibility around the management of each individual session, which I'm going to go into in a sec. One thing that might be needed, and hopefully this is the case because activity is able to happen and people are still interested in sport, is there might need to be a capacity which is placed on club membership. And if that, in that example I gave, the 100 people for one session per week, if 100 is therefore the maximum that people could get, or set to make sure that people get at least one session per week, then there's obviously a process in terms of a waiting list that we need to adopt, or we look at providing additional facility space should clubs meet that capacity, to provide additional capacity for that sport to take place. So it's something that sports already do. Football, netball, they have rugby, they have trials, and they have a capacity with the number of teams. So it's not alien to us as a sports union. It's just not the majority of sports where it's more welcoming and open. But in reality, is we're going to have restrictions in place on numbers, and we hope that that's as big as we possibly can. But we need to be aware of that capacity limit. So we're working with clubs on that. We've raised that with them. We've got them thinking about what that might be, if they wanted to set a capacity, and what they're looking to try and do as a minimum threshold around their sessions per week. So fluid situation, and as soon as we've got information on facility space and allocation of people, we will be absolutely working with clubs to get the maximum we can out of every single session possible. But clearly you can see that that is a headache for us. So as part of the headache of the numbers, as well as the needing to sort of fit within the guidelines and the restrictions, we need to be innovative with our approach, and that's pretty clear. And I think we need to be innovative with our approach around our delivery, but also in each individual session. But we also need to be innovative with our approach to the year, because it's a different year than any other year. So we've looked at a staged approach just as a suggestion to people, just to get them thinking about it. So stage one, so you're talking early semester, is about just introducing as many people to that sport as possible with no kind of sight around competitive stuff. We're just introducing them, almost treating them as all of them as a fresher coming in, as a new person coming into the sport, but maybe that's in a more extended period of time than it would otherwise be. Stage 2 is about playing the sport and building that community. Clearly, the community side of things from the individual sports point of view is going to be lacking. That's something we're all going to miss out on, is that big club sessions where everyone's together and they're also then having socials together. That is going to be diluted somewhat. So there's that need to sort of maintain and build that community, and that's up for all of us to play that part, but primarily the club committee to build that community. And then stage 3, obviously I've said January for competition. There may be a need to just have that sort of third part of semester about preparing for competition, and hopefully we can get to a point where we can potentially get some friendlies in place, or some sort of low-level competition to help that. But even just if that isn't able, just getting into that mindset of preparing for competition in January onwards. Some other things just to be wary of, but I'm going to go into this in a bit of detail, is equipment, cleaning, the additional time from Oriam to actually run the centre itself, because clearly if there's equipment that Oriam need to take down, put away, there's a sanitising responsibility on them, which might require additional time. So we need to be wary of that. So it might just mean that the session time where you're actually getting activity is cut down even shorter than it was normally. And we just need to get on with that and try and maximise the time that we do have on the court or on the pitch or whatever. And this is a critical point. Below the last point on the slide is about recording who was at every session for track and trace purposes. And we will work to get a system in place which will help that, preferably online. We're looking at 2 options right now, which is through the students' MRM, which is basically their online membership for Oriam, whether they can book into sessions, which has an ability for waiting lists and notification of spaces being open. That's one option we're looking at, but also we're looking at a Sign Up Genius system, which we would pay for and we would operate. But essentially, we need to know who is in every single session, so that if there is anyone that comes in with symptoms, or who is, so that they can notify people to then go into self-isolation, or if there is a case, then they need to then be tested for the people that were in that session will need to be tested for that. But we don't want to get to a point where we need to say, right, there was in the cheerleading session there was one person who has contracted the virus, but we don't know who was in the session, so actually we need to cancel all cheerleading sessions until that period's out. We wouldn't want that. So to minimise impact, we need to make sure we know who's in that session, because it might only be the 10 or the 20 people in that session that we need to restrict. So that will be a headache, and we ask for your support in making sure that does take place, and we'll notify you as to the processes to how we're going to do that. But we're just working through that just now. One example I wanted to put up, and Bill can correct me later on afterwards if I've got any of my terminology wrong, but I wanted to bring it to life a wee bit, just to give a real life example of this. So I've based this on archery session on I think it's a Tuesday evening when they've got 3 hours. So clubs should exit, the previous clubs from that should exit the hall 2 in this case, 5 minutes before the session ends. So that allows for that flow of people to make sure that's minimised as possible. What we're potentially asking people to do is arrive at hall 2 for the session no earlier than 10 minutes before. So coming to the session 20-30 minutes before and standing in Oriam is not an option. There'll just be too much congestion in corridors, and we won't be able to meet the sort of the social distancing guidelines that are potentially in place. We have already talked about pre-changed for the session, which might need to be in place, so keep that one in mind. I've talked about the attendance register. One thing about the 3-hour session that archery could do to maximise capacity of that activity is split that down into 2 90-minute sessions, for example. You might have, I don't know, Bill, if you've got how many shooting channels you could have, but if there's 4 meters apart and you've only got 4 shooting channels within hall 2, They're clearly marked out by cones to make sure that people don't go between the channels. Shooters are lined up behind the shooting line in 2 metre distances. Obviously, if 2 metres still exist, again marked out by cones to make sure people abide by those. The number of shooters is probably unknown right now. I think in Scottish archery it's actually one person per boss. In GB archery I thought it was two. So clearly that's very limiting right now, which is why you might need to go to 2 90-minute sessions, or you might even decide to go 3 1-hour sessions as an example. But this is what we're asking our clubs to think about right now, to come back to us, to think, how can we maximise the facility time that we have to give people as much opportunity to take part, but not dilute down the offer so much that people just get fed up with it and just end up sacking it. We might lose people from sport altogether as a result of that. So there is definitely a balancing act on that. There might be an allocated time of shooting per person, which helps with the session. Again, I'm going into more examples which the club can work out themselves. Archery have shared equipment in terms of bow and arrow use. That might not be possible, or it might be possible, and actually each after each bout of shooting they need to wipe down the bow and the arrow afterwards, but they potentially have the target, the individual target that might be specific to the person, and they need to put it up and back down again after they're shooting. Or they might manage to get an allocated club bow and arrow per person, which might stretch their equipment requirements, which again we've asked clubs is do you need additional equipment based on what your plans are, to allow sessions to be able to maximise the activity. So open for requests on that, and clearly there's limited budget around that, but we want to hear what limitations there are in the sport to make sure that we can get as much activity happening as possible. Bosses put away by the club. So in Hall 2, that might be the case where clubs have an allocated person that go in and out of the storage space, but they must sanitise the equipment before it's gone away, or when it's away. In Hall 1, that might be slightly different, where it might just be there's no one allowed access into the storage whatsoever under no circumstance, and it's purely Oriam staff that are bringing equipment in and out, and they've got a responsibility on sanitising stuff. But clearly, and from a netball perspective, for example, they might have a responsibility around sanitising the balls before it goes into the cage, to then put the Oriam staff to put the cage away. So, and that all needs to be built into the club time. And from an archery perspective, they might then exit out Hall 2 fire door, because there might be clubs coming in afterwards, for example. So hopefully that brings it to life. Unfortunately, it's a bleak reality in the fact that nobody wants to have these restrictions in place, but we need to be thinking about it to make sure the activity is safe to be able to take place. Starting to get to think around, and I'm aware this is a lot of information, so I will send through the slides, and there's an opportunity to ask questions at the end, but I'm chucking information out for you to make sure you're all coming from an informed base. I started thinking and looking at resources around what the coaching delivery and some top tips around that. Beej, who's on the call, Beej Koya, who's our head football coach, was on a UK coaching course as well, and he sent me some slides which I can send on afterwards, and that's helped me with some of this. But you guys, I don't know how much information you've been privy to in terms of your governing body stuff, so you might have better tips than this, but I wanted to just get some of my top tips to you to start thinking if you hadn't. One thing, critical, clearly there's restrictions in place, but we need to make sure that the environment that we create is both welcoming and fun, and that needs to be within the parameters. But that should be our goal, regardless of COVID or not. That should be part of your mindset anyway, but even more so within this time, to make sure that students have a good experience. One thing that's suggested in the UK coaching webinar is about the plan, do and review. And there's a few slides which will, and actually there's a link to the actual UK coaching webinar that is in this click through. It's a 45-minute call, but it just starts, I think it was, Beej was saying it was from a more of a children's perspective in terms of delivery to them. However, some of the stuff that they're chatting to is definitely transferable into the delivery of adult stuff. but they've got some suggested questions or things to think about from the plan, do and review cycle in terms of planning activity, which is worthwhile having a look through, as well as the webinars there to listen or to watch. The other thing that came out of that was a step model to planning, and I thought it was pretty good, so wanted to nick it, and because I think it's really pertinent to how we deliver our activity. So clearly we've got a responsibility to tell you what space is exactly available to you, but hopefully you've got some understanding now as to what we're trying to do. But once you know that space, how can you utilise this to the best that you can? What tasks can actually take place within that activity? It might be that passing balls between people, for example, might not be able to happen. So it might be individual balls per person, for example. So what is the actual task that people can do within the session? What equipment is needed? Clearly, I've talked about that shared equipment, and I've talked about the sanitization of that. So minimising the equipment requirements is probably a good thing. But what do we need to deliver our session? And then critically, who will be there? And again, this is something that will obviously be informed by the club committee, but you have a hand in that as well in terms of how the sessions will run, who will be at them, and then it's then informing your activity based on that. So I thought that was a really good model in terms of applying some thinking around it. I think it's critical, the communication with the participants, so making sure they understand the expectations of that session, and that will obviously be quite heavy to begin with. Once people get into the routine, that hopefully becomes the new norm. But clearly setting expectations around that activity, but also that communication with your club committee. I'm really wanting that to happen once the club committee have done a bit of planning and thinking at their end, which we've tasked them to do. Really want them to engage with you to make sure that you're happy and you're comfortable with what they're suggesting, because clearly it's about your health and your safety as well in terms of coming in and delivering that. You've absolutely got a part to play within that. Obviously, there's that adapted approach we chatted about before. In terms of that shared equipment, just other little snippets. So sharing of bibs is common in a number of sports, so that might not be able to take place at all. Might be there's an allocated bib per person and someone's responsible for washing the bibs afterwards, for example. Bottles not shared. People come with their own water bottles. They don't touch anyone else's. They're stored correctly on the side of the pitch. The water breaks, if there is social distancing, need to be social distance as well. You can't just have everyone just come into a huddle to get water, and then that completely defeats the purpose of having these restrictions in place. And equipment we've chatted about before. But another good example is in some sports there's phones and markers put out, and clearly you pass responsibility on to our adults that we're trying to educate to get them empowered. So getting them to do that might not be possible, and actually you maybe need to allocate an equipment officer, or actually you do it yourself as a coach to make sure you minimise the risk as much as possible. So little snippets of information. We are going to do risk assessments with the clubs, so we will give you sight of those again to make sure that you're comfortable with that and the planning has gone into that. So you'll need to read and have that signed. Clearly, we've chatted about adherence to the guidelines and restrictions and cleaning protocol within each session. I've encouraged you to stay up to date with the return to play guidelines already. Cannot stress enough how critical it is to ensure that session register is taken, and clearly there's a joint responsibility for that on both the club committee and yourselves to make sure that that does happen. And to be honest, that's one where it's a zero tolerance approach. If clubs aren't abiding by taking sessions for registers, we'll need to do some sort of disciplinary around that, because it's critical to our response if there's anything. And I suppose a key point in terms of all of our roles is leadership is key. You'll get people which will bend the rules, which don't that don't think that don't think they've got a risk of catching the virus. So there might be that aspect, but there might just be the other aspect of making sure that the session is welcoming, it is fun, it is engaging, and I think all of that is making sure that you as a leader are strong and you set the right example to the students, which you do already, but I can't stress that is critical now moving forward to make sure that we're all reducing risk as much as possible. So hopefully some top tips that you can maybe add to your list. Some other health and safety ones that we've thought about. So I've chatted about risk assessment, I've chatted about cleaning requirements. There is, and I should have said this at the beginning, we got lots of questions in from yourselves before the session, before this session, and tried to make sure that all the questions were answered within the text of the slides. If I haven't, then please do ask at the end. Hopefully this is bringing up some other questions that you can ask us. But cleaning products was one question that was asked in advance that we don't have a specific answer to as of yet, but clearly there's a need for cleaning products across the board in terms of Oriam and Sports Union. So we need to work out the responsibility of that in terms of the purchase and the organisation of that. First aid is definitely something to be aware of. All the Oriam staff have been trained in terms of COVID first aid response. And like everything that we do in terms of first aid in the building in Oriam, they should be their first port of call around first aid. So notifying front reception, having having the number on your phone, or the students having the Safe Zone app, which I jumped to the last point, is if there is any sort of serious injury, the students should have downloaded the Safe Zone app, which allows them to dial straight into security to be able to get an ambulance there as quickly as possible, actually bypassing Oriam staff who will then be caught up by security staff. But clearly that's for a major emergency rather than just a cut or an injury that's not so serious. In terms of external clubs, we need to do a bit of work with them on first aid. So that's something that we, again, is on the to-do list. If that affects anyone on this call, we are thinking about that. And I've talked about track and trace. And I suppose the only other point around the self-isolation, and it probably links back to that leadership point, is clearly the world isn't going to be back to normal anytime soon. We're going to have some of these restrictions in place, and the virus is going to be in place, and we need to try and do our bit to minimise that as much as possible. Now, if we get to a situation where competitive activity starts back up again, and there's challenges around people actually getting the virus or showing symptoms, and who are potentially going to be playing on that event or that activity, and then clearly there might be pressure on them to actually come in and take part in that activity. That shouldn't happen. And remember, the principle is it should be safety first, activity going ahead second. And it's the same for training. If people are pushing the boundaries on coming to training who should be self-isolating to minimise risk, then there's probably a responsibility for you to let us know, bypass the committee, and make sure that we know so that we can hold that person accountable, because we're only as weak as our weakest link. So we really need to work together on that. But there might be some challenges in there around training with teams and competition, which might be more further in the future, but something to be aware of. All right, I'm nearing the end of the slides and my voice is getting a bit hoarse, but hopefully this is good value information for you. We have done a risk register as part of the Sports Union across all of our activity. Wanted to present the top 5 risks to you to make sure that it's in your awareness. Number 1 is underground socials, and I'll go into detail on that because there's absolute zero tolerance on that. If clubs are found to have underground socials and breaking guidelines, that is an absolute no-go, because the potential for if there was a COVID case that had broken out, or number of cases that had broken out due to a club having a social event underground at a flat, imagine the press headlines of that, and imagine the stick that we would get from the university as a result of that. So we've gone very hard with the students on that particular point. So again, there's a leadership responsibility, and for you guys, if you hear anything around socials which you think are going to break that, then please do notify us, and we'll step in and apply that zero tolerance approach, because that would be catastrophic to sport at Heriot-Watt, and to the reputation of the university as well. In terms of other risks, clearly students not following the guidance. There's 1,800 members of the sports union. There's going to be people that don't follow the guidance. We just need to correct them and make sure that they know the guidance first of all. We've got a big education piece to do with the returning members and our new members. That's on us to do. But it's then the policing and the adherence to that moving forward, which clearly there's a responsibility from you guys, because we as staff are not in those sessions. In terms of new member recruitment, that is a risk. So, and it's something that the clubs are really concerned about in terms of how attractive the offer is to new members. So we're doing our utmost to try and make it as attractive as possible, but it's something that's been flagged as a risk to the sports union. Might be that current members, there's an apathy from them to get back into the sport because it's so different to what they've known. And again, we're trying to mitigate that by, we're going to have a call with all returning members and open that out to all the thousands of students that we have in the sports union. A returning call at the end of August to give them as much information as possible to make sure they're as informed as possible, and hopefully sell them that they should still take up an OREA membership and they should still take up a club membership, because the offer is going to be attractive enough. Hopefully, after lockdown, or there's some more easing taking place. And clearly there might be some clubs where it might not be high risk across the board, but high risk for some sports where facility access or sports restrictions are so tight that really restrict access happening or activity happening to anywhere near normal. And clearly there's a need for contingency within that space, and we've worked with those individual clubs on that. But that's clearly a risk to us. Right, I've got one last slide, and then it's over to you guys to come in with some questions. So we're well on time for finishing at past. So in terms of start of term, so thinking a bit beyond our approach and starting to think about the whole semester holistically, we are in the process of developing a new sports union website, which will be launched close to the start of term, which will provide more information and better information. But we've updated the current SU website, and we will be updating that as a stopgap until we can move over and turn off some of those old pages. We have asked clubs to do a video, so we've given them some guidance on how to develop a video. We're looking for 2 minutes, and again, it's about building that attractiveness to make sure that returning and new members know what the normal offer is, to make sure that we attract as many people in as possible. Club tasters, so week off Freshers Week, which is week commencing the 7th of September, or Welcome Week, should get a fine for calling it Freshers Week, because that's banned these days. We're still looking to do club tasters as normal. Well, I say actually as normal. It's not as normal because we made a change. We're making a fundamental change to it from what it was in previous years, where you guys perhaps weren't even aware of a lot of this. But essentially, we used to run a taster session for every single club across Welcome Week. And that had generally happened during the day out with the training times. What the clubs fed back on was that rather than creating a completely new timetable, we wanted to try and do that within the existing time of the training times, as well as that would then allow for the coaches to be involved in that activity as well, which would provide an additional professionalism within that activity. So we've extended the semester to almost 13 weeks to include the training to be in that Freshers Week. And we will convert that to be a normal training session into a fresher-only session. The exact details of that activity is still to be confirmed. I still need to work that through next week. But that is our intention, to still do some sort of club taster week within that week. We are looking to do a welcome fair. That's going to be on Wednesday, the 9th of September. We are looking for that to be in person. We've booked out the indoor synthetic, Sports Hall 1 and Hall 2, and we're looking to run an in-person one in conjunction with the Students' Union, connecting them together and looking to deliver that in person. Obviously, the capacity of the event and how we run the event are still up for debate, and Graham, who's on the call, is going to be delivering that event. So we hope it will be we hope it will happen in person. It may not, but we're working towards it happening. What we will do as well is some sort of virtual event at the same time as that, and happening through the week, to make sure that people, working with the club committees, to make sure people have an engagement if they cannot attend in person or choose not to attend in person on the welcome fair, to cover both sets of people. Some other kind of updates for you. Clearly, pre-season for a lot of clubs has been scuppered. And trials will also be a challenge. If there's no competitive activity happening, there's no need to do trials within the early period like we would normally do. However, with both pre-season and trials, there is scope for additional facility space to allow that to happen at the time in which it should be needed to happen. And we'll work with individual clubs where there might need to, where that's a challenge, and that goes back to the approach that we've chatted about before around the fact that it's not just a get people in, trial them, allocate them to teams, and then train them in those teams. That's not how we're going to be able to do things. It might be slightly different for every single sport on that. So we need to think about how we operate within the activity that we have. It might mean, for example, football have 6 teams. It might mean that actually their 6 training sessions are not allocated to a team other than maybe their first team, because they want to continue that on because East of Scotland might start up. But those other 5 training sessions are club sessions where there's not an allocated team. You get them together, you do some training, and you then start to try and get, I suppose, people based on ability level into the right sessions. And clearly you might need to split returning members and then new members. You might have 4 of those sessions are returning members, 1 of those a new member. I don't know. That's up for the sports and for you guys to start thinking about as to how that might run. But if we need more facility space, we will absolutely try and accommodate that as best we can. Clearly, there's not going to be competitive sport. There will be some governing body sport which might happen earlier. There is also some discussions with Bucks and Triple S whether they might be able to do some events. They might go outdoor, they might go a different format, they might go regional first rather than a national event. All of that's all been worked out just now, and Bucks and Triple S will have some sort of schedule out by the end of August. Once hopefully it's more informed for semester 1. But I wouldn't rule out competitive sport full stop across the whole sports union, but clearly in some sports there's less likelihood of that. Sort of a team sport, contact sport, there's less likelihood of that. For example, we are aware that is a key reason why people join the sports union. So we will look to try and replace that with something as best we can. So if that's small-sided tournaments internally, if that's friendlies internally or externally, we will look to that, and we've earmarked the time which would normally be allocated to matches, both weekend and Wednesdays, specifically for that competition. So it's not like that's getting lost from the sports union. That facility space will be there for us to use, and we intend to use it to try and get activity happening. I've talked about some of the low risk activity. We are looking to still do transport, but it'll be limited to clubs where there's a need. So if they've got an external facility or they're being able to take part in a specific event, but there'll be restrictions in place, like there'll only be 6 per minibus, for example. You might all need to wear masks. The cleaning will need to be done afterwards. There might need to be windows open to increase ventilation, for example. All these guidelines will be in place, but we're hoping that transport will still be available for those that specifically need it. And we're reviewing the allocation per sports to accommodate that. It might be that some sports need more than others because of that reduced capacity, and because they're an external facility, so we're assessing need across the board and then revising our allocations. And I suppose last point, which is a good point, is that programme of activity that we've chatted about is, to the best of our knowledge, using some assumptions, but in hope and in with some sort of education in there. But clearly the programme will be under review and is subject to change. And we obviously are aware of second spikes in certain localities within the UK as well as across the globe, that we just need to react to that, and we'll need to be nimble and flexible with that. But I don't think that comes as a surprise to anyone. But hopefully you can appreciate the volume of work that's going in from the staff team on getting us ready for start of term, or as ready as we can be. We're well behind where we would normally be in any year, which I'm finding really hard to deal with as someone who's pretty organised. But that's the reality of the situation, and some things will need to run to the wire, like exact facility programming for sports, because occupancy and capacity could have a couple of iterations of changes over the next month, which might completely influence or change what we need to do. So we might need to run some things to the wire, which I'm hoping through some of the information that we've given you just now, you understand our current stand, so that gap in information, it doesn't become an issue for you. You know what we're planning, and obviously if there's severe restrictions in place, then we need to change things quite dramatically, and we'll be we've already put in contingencies planning in place for that as well. So I've chatted there for a full hour, but hopefully that's been really useful information for you guys. Just open up for questions. So if you want to put your hand or just put your question in the chat, please do so. And I can't promise to answer every single question, but I'll try to. And any question that I don't know, will absolutely come back to you within a timely manner. So please do now take the opportunity to ask any questions or any sort of feedback as well on anything that you've seen. Please do fire away. Sarah, you've come off mute there. Was that an intention to ask a question?
Yeah, I literally cannot find the put your hand up thing on my phone. Yeah, so I guess, is there any flexibility in terms of being able to, obviously we've got the indoor courts for next year, but is there any flexibility that we could maybe get the indoor synthetic pitch, if that's been classed as an outdoor facility?
Yeah, so I spoke to Ross about that recently. He's wanting to try and protect that as best as possible, but clearly if it gets to a point where we're limited so much that we just need to use as much space as possible. So it's not our intention to right now, but it's absolutely something that we could turn to should things get challenging for us. And clearly that being classed as an indoor space helps us. But there's issues obviously around footwear and equipment. We only have, I think we've only got 2, for example, movable netball posts, but playing bench netball, for example, might be something that helps. So that's part of the potential thinking, but we haven't moved to that as a plan A. It's more like a plan Z right now, and we'll just wait and see what happens over the next couple of weeks.
Yeah. Okay. And my other question was, and you probably got more research on this than me, but I mean, there's other places that have put kind of the temperature scanning in place. Have you looked into any of that?
No, we haven't. And there is temperature scanning happening for our performance groups. Definitely, I don't think that should be a precedence for the general public, because it would just be unmanageable for us to do. For example, we're not having a scanner at front reception to scan people's temperature, and that's where we are really relying on our members to self-nominate if they have a temperature or have any symptoms. Clearly an asymptomatic person is a challenge for all of us. But if anyone has any symptoms whatsoever, they should not attend training, and that should be the clear guidance to members, because we're not going to have a temperature scanner in place, and we're also not intending to have a pre-questionnaire, for example, which is suggested in some governing bodies protocol for some groups. Again, we're relying on the members to be able to self-nominate that as best we can. All right.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Sarah. Claire, do you have a rough idea of when the individual club meetings will happen? So, in terms of our conversation with clubs, we've had an all-club meeting about 5 weeks ago, and we've had 3 individual focus group meetings about 2 weeks ago. And they presented with some of this information, some of it more specific to their role as club committee. So that is happening. What we've tasked for them to do is we sent them a presentation slide with lots of questions on lots of different topics for them to go and consider as a club committee. So they should be meeting now to be able to think about what their sport's going to look like, put that down into paper, and then send it back to us. We will review that, and that'll be something that I'll be looking for them to also share with yourselves to make sure you guys have some feedback, because that's going to be a draft 1, and there's going to be iteration of that moving forward. What the intention of that is to then do is form a presentation slideshow that we will top and tail with some sports union information, and they will then go to the individual the returning membership for that individual club and have a call like this with their individual membership, for returning students obviously only. And that will give a real strong prelude to us then going into an all-member call at the end of August. But we might also squeeze in a club call in August before then to present on the latest plans for that. So that's when that is all happening. We don't have the capacity to meet with clubs on an individual club by club basis due to the volume of work. So we're really relying on the club committees to start working around that and have those meetings and have those discussions, but filter into us with their thinking around that. So that hopefully answers your question, Claire, and a bit more, and gives a bit more context to our communication with them. Bill, yeah, thanks for that. I am really hopeful for that, and we'll wait and see what revisions come out from that. The Sports Scotland website is where you get all there's a link which says COVID recovery, and then you're into all the different governing bodies sports. So that's in the link in this spreadsheet. But encourage you to make yourself aware of that site so that you can have a look through that. Folks, any other questions? Thanks, Paul. Hopefully, Bill, you enjoyed my archery example there. That's one of the challenges of being a sports union staff member, is you've got to try and understand 31 different sports, and that's probably one of the biggest challenges of the job, and probably one of the biggest challenges right now is managing that, managing expectations. Guys, we've still got 22 minutes, but happy to end the call early because it's your evenings. But this is a really good opportunity to ask any questions. So can you please go back to the slide showing the sports classes outdoor? Yeah, certainly can. Absolutely fine. Claire, sorry, my transitions aren't helping with that. So yeah, that's slides there. So clearly, Claire, I don't know what sport that you're involved with. So yeah, cheerleading is clearly an indoor contact sport. Yeah. So it's a high risk sport. So actually, the one thing that you guys will need to consider is the contact. Removing the contact, for example, is one thing, but also within that facility space, you guys are over capacity for what I think the capacity is going to be within Studio One. So we need to work with clubs like that, cheerleading, boxing, dance, who actually who actually fill the space more than they otherwise would. So we're very aware we need to have those discussions with yourselves to make sure that that's manageable.
Yeah, because I was just thinking that we could be classed as non-contact outdoor if we just do fitness on the grass or something, or on the synthetic. Like, we don't have to do the stunting part. That's the only part where you really touch people, but the other 3 elements are completely on your own.
Yeah, exactly. And it's good to start thinking about alternative activity to get to a point where hopefully we can then transition people out of that alternative activity into a normal activity. I think what we've got to do with the clubs is make sure that that is managed. So if you're going to go running on the walled garden, for example, that might be all sports are wanting to do that, and then just the grass gets shot and doesn't become a usable space anymore for us. So there is a sense of having to manage that to a certain extent, but also making sure that you are aware of the guidelines for whatever alternative activity you potentially do. So there is some challenges around that as well. So Sarah, I have one question on Bucks. If you go back to that slide after 2, please. We can testing me where it was. Yeah, so Bucks updates. Sarah, do you have a specific question on that?
Yeah, so just to clarify, essentially if books for netball went back in January, basically it doesn't matter if we were to get up or down for the season after that, we would be staying where we are. Is that how I'm reading that?
Yeah, exactly. So whatever you finished now, if you were relegated or promoted, that will happen, but won't happen until 2021-22 season. Next year is just going to be a stopgap year where we're trying to get activity happening, but there's not going to be promotion or relegation because the leagues, we have no idea. And clearly there's not going to be the same number of teams across the board. So the leagues will look very different to what they are this year.
Right, okay. So okay, got it.
But obviously there's a challenge in there to make sure that it's attractive enough to be able to compete. But I think everyone would just be delighted if we're able to actually compete in some sort of sport activity, regardless of whether it's promotion or relegation. Yeah. But we will intend to put as many teams in as we possibly can as well. So there's an assurance on that as well. So Elizabeth, so from the dance club, large part of the club is prepping comps team for competition semester 2, for which we have specific times each week. Possibly the case, or will we reallocate time for recreational instead? So I suppose that's a question that you guys need to ask yourselves. We will give you all the facility space that you've had previously, as well as any additional space that you've managed to negotiate through us through the end of the year, club development meetings. And it's up to you as to how you want to use that space. And if that space is not meeting the needs of what your sport requires, then it's a case of coming to us and we'll work with you to try and allocate different space. But you need to come with ahead with a rationale for that. But really that's over to you to decide that. Clearly that's that transition from recreational into building the community into that competitive side of things that is going to be different and a bit more long and drawn out than it was than it would normally be. Hopefully that doesn't necessarily answer your question, Elizabeth, but chucks it back onto you guys to come up with a plan, and the club should be doing that right now. Fencing. Are we able to store some of our kits separately, as it needs to be quarantined after each session for 3 days? We are aware of that requirement from fencing, and I have noted that within our schedule of work. So that's not been forgotten. I think Ben raised that in the previous call, so I do know that. I suppose it's a good example of is there any other sports out there that requires that. For example, would be great to hear that some of that minutiae detail we cannot get into as a sports union because there's so much information across all the different sports. So any help that you can give us around specific requirements that we need to make sure we've got in place, please do raise with us. So that's all the questions so far answered. Has anyone else got any questions for us? No. Well, I'll just run through the slides, a couple to end with, if there's no more questions. Sorry. So in terms of follow-up from this call, clearly I've given you some information about what the next 4 weeks looks like in terms of planning for a year. In terms of an asks to you guys is clearly not all your coaches from all your in your sport are on this call, so there's some people that have missed it. So we'll pass the recording on, but if you just make sure that that's referenced within, or you give them a wee nudge to make sure that they've recorded this, because clearly we've wanted to get everyone up to same knowledge base as quickly as possible, to then allow us to then give you the detail underneath. So please do pass this recording on once we've sent it to you. Reid, oh, I've got a question there. Right, I'll answer this question now. Volleyball looking to get some outdoor nets. Would this be allowed as we would be under the section indoor contact? The brackets that I've put in there in terms of the what sport is in what section is just purely to identify it based on the normal playing of that individual sport. Doesn't necessarily mean that we can't have activity happening in a non-contact way indoors, for example. Callum, I think if you can raise that with myself in an email around what your plans are for that, then we'll look into the feasibility of that. So please contact me out with this call, and we can chat about that afterwards. All right. In terms of other points to follow up on, please do read. I'm going to send you out some other resources, one in which BJ sent on from the UK coaching course that he was on. There's also a Sports Scotland set of guidance. So please do read other resources, and I'm sure your governing bodies are potentially giving you resources that we're maybe not privy to as not being coaches. So there's a lot of information out there, unfortunately, right now that we need to scour through. But the more information we've got, the better informed we are. And we'll send through some stuff, and we'll promise to also send through anything that comes through our inbox that we think might be relevant, and just straight to you guys through email. So we'll try and continue to do that. As I've alluded to, I think it's a good thing for you guys to engage the club committee on their planning to return. We've talked about that submitting of draft plans by the end of this week. That's very much draft plans. That's up to now us to interrogate that, to make sure that they're on the right page and they've got the picture, and they're not thinking completely off piste. I suppose always the door is open now for feedback and questions at any point. We're going to be stronger together. There's a lot of stuff that we need to get through. There's a clear collective responsibility on making sure that we get the best out of this semester. So please do provide some feedback or questions to us at any point through the next few months, and hopefully that dialogue will be there for you. In terms of our responsibilities, we need to finalise. Obviously, I mean, there's lots of stuff we do, but just to simplify it from a coaching perspective, is we need to finalise your job descriptions, get them out to you at some point in August, so we're aware of the need to do that. Clearly, there's a need to also get risk assessment, which will be part of that sign off, I suppose, to make sure that you're safe for coming back in. There may also be some additional training that we get you to do from an Oriam perspective for those that are operating with an Oriam, which would be quite light, but just again gets you up to a minimum standard to help you come into the facility and make sure that you're comfortable with arrangements. We very aware that we want to keep this dialogue up, because things will change and we need to communicate to you what our final plans are before start of term. Haven't decided exactly how that will be, but open to also having a call with you 4 weeks down the line and going through the detail like we have done here. Or we might populate that within our PowerPoint presentation and record and send that out, or we might just send that out via an email with some documentation. So I suppose the commitment from us is we will communicate with you. In what format we haven't yet decided, so please do look out for that as well. I think that is me though. Came for just now. Hopefully that's been useful for you. So just a thanks for giving up your time for this call. Hopefully there's been some good information in there for you and you feel more informed. If there's any final questions or comments, then please do fire it in the chat, or forever hold your peace. No, okay, then we'll end it there. I'd welcome any comments just now before you guys end the call, just to make sure that we're on the right path for this. So if there's any feedback that you can provide to us before you end the call, that would be much appreciated as well. If not, then we'll look forward to seeing you and hearing from you in the future.
Thanks, Chris. That was a lot of talking for an hour and a half.
I know. I need a cup of tea and my actual tea now as well. So
yeah, no, very positive. Thank you.
Thanks, Emma. Thanks, Erin. See you guys soon.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. That was
Cheers,
really good.
Chris.
Cheers, guys.
Bye.
Thank you. Very good and informative. I definitely think we should have more meetings like this rather than get us all in the halls.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Claire.
No worries. Bye.
See you.
Yeah, that was good. Yeah, it probably does make sense to try and have the coaches talking if possible.
Yeah, absolutely. And whether we can actually start to lean on each other as well and put some best practice out there, we'll look at that as well. I'm specifically going to work with Beach for example, to try and get some football best practice, which might help other sports. We might try and do that with other coaches as well.
Actually, I've just realised something right now as well. Our insurance provider for all of Aikido in Britain, they've currently suspended insurance for everyone.
Right.
So literally nobody can train at
Right.
all. So that's something that may impact on us quite heavily.
Yeah, very good point. I'll put that onto our list of things to look at, insurance provision across all activities. So
I'm getting updates anyway, but the update is pretty much always still no more news. So as soon as they tell us, we're okay. But I mean, even if we start up again at Orium, we can't train until they insure us again.
Yeah, exactly.
So, and that may affect others. Any combat sports, that'll probably affect.
Yeah, nice one. Well, not a nice one. It's unfortunate, but thanks for bringing that to our attention.
No worries.
All right. Bede, are you still on the call?
Hello, Chris. Yeah, I'm still on.
Hi, mate. Do you want to just stay behind for a couple of minutes and get your thoughts?
Hold on. Let me. Yeah, I'll be able to stay for 2-3 minutes if that's okay.
That's fine. Ormo, do you want to just stop the recording there and then that's us? Maybe, I don't know, is Susuke falling asleep here? You're free to go, Susuke, if you want, you know. Nice one. See you, Susuke. Yeah, Beach, just your initial feedback on that.
Yeah, no, I thought it was very, very good. It was clear. I like the staged approach to it. And as you said, things might change in 2 weeks, 3 weeks, a month down the line, but I think it gives everyone a starting point.
Yeah, definitely. Good.
Yeah.
Is there any information that was from the UK coaching that you think would have been relevant to include, or I think we covered that?
Yeah, no, I think it was all intertwined. Yeah, I think from what you've come up with and what they said on the UK coaching webinar, I think there was a lot of connection between both. So I think everything that needed to be covered was covered and more. I've written down. Obviously, I know you said you're going to send the slides, but
yeah,
I've written down some points, and you know, there's clarity in everything.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, good. Obviously, actually, when I was thinking through the call there around capacity, football and probably rugby have got the opposite problem in the fact that they're going to have too many members,
Yeah.
or too many people in